Taiwanese State University in Ohio. Professor al-Azm is the founder and board member of the, he will tell us hopefully more about this, the Day After initiative, and this is for cultural heritage protection. He is also a senior advisor to also the Cultural Heritage Initiative team. And I would like to welcome him first.
First of all, thank you very much for coming to hear me speak today. I can't tell you that I am bringing you good news, because you know I'm not, and because you all have a morbid sense within you, like everyone else. You're going to, there will be some, I don't want to use the word pleasure here, but there will be some appreciation perhaps of the painful issues that I will be bringing up. I will try and end on a more upbeat note, but I can't fully promise you that. But anyway, you will have to bear with me. I'd also like to thank, obviously, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Leiden University, is it LUCIS, is that how you pronounce it? Center for organizing this. I think this is a great opportunity for me to come and talk to you about some of the work that we're doing in Syria. Now, by way of brief introduction, since March 2011, Syria has gone through a traumatic and destabilizing process that has strained ethnic, sectarian, social fabric of the country, almost everything that makes Syria a single unified state. In fact, Syria is no longer a state. If we're talking about that, it's a failed state now. Yet it did contain and does contain people that share a common history, goals and aspirations, and those have been now pushed to beyond breaking point, and much of the country lies in ruins today. So with that in mind, therefore, any transition process that is going to aim to bring Syrians together and assist them in working towards ending this bloodshed and perhaps rebuilding their shattered country will need to try and identify where common denominators exist between the opposing sides, and also provide mechanisms that will help them work towards consensus. And that is something that is very lacking these days. And this is where the question of national identity comes in, because national identity may be one area of common interest that still remains amongst Syrians that Syrians may wish to discuss. And by perhaps helping them identify challenges and establishing common goals, it may be possible to begin this process, or a process at least, of some sort of cohesion. With that in mind, I believe that cultural heritage has a critical role to play in enhancing this Syrian identity. And through that, then perhaps help steer Syria on its path towards a post-conflict stabilization and reconciliation process. It will be long and it will be hard, but certainly I believe that cultural heritage is one of the few remaining common denominators that exist amongst Syrians where they can still speak to each other. And of course, nowhere is cultural heritage and national identity more demonstrable than when it comes to the issue of what makes a Syrian a Syrian. Syria and Syrians have a resilient sense of identity, which is based on a concept of shared citizenship around a common history, and most importantly supported by a long and rich cultural heritage. So this war is going to end someday, and when this current violence ends, the people of Syria were going to have to find ways to reconnect with the symbols that once united them across religious and political lines. The country's ancient past, as represented by its rich cultural heritage, some of you as students of archaeology and history would be familiar with this, and in our case it will be key to this process. And it will be key for no less reason than the fact that all Syrians, for example, know who Queen Zenobia is. You grow up knowing who Queen Zenobia is. All Syrians know where Palmyra is. Every Syrian knows about Ugarit and the first alphabet. Every Syrian lives right next door, either on top of an archaeological site, right next door to an archaeological site, or a stone's throw away from an archaeological site. And anyone who has visited Syria or worked in Syria, for those of you who are scholars of archaeology, would know this as well. So protection and preservation of this heritage is of paramount importance for all Syrians. And it is imperative, therefore, for the international community to assist in this process, without which all is lost. Protecting and preserving Syria's history and heritage is not just about saving the past. I cannot stress this strongly enough. It is about saving Syria's future too, because without the past, the future is lost. So, with the time remaining to me, I'm going to now take the opportunity to highlight briefly the damage that's been done to Syria's cultural heritage, for those of you who may kind of be a little hazy on that, and more importantly, what is being done at the moment to help alleviate it, and the role of, most importantly, of non-state actors, local non-state actors, in saving this cultural heritage. So, to begin with, I just want to point out that Syria has 6 World Heritage Sites listed by UNESCO, and all 6 of them have been damaged, unfortunately. It's also important for me to point out to you that this damage began to really take shape in 2012. The uprising against the Assad regime began in March 2011. However, in the early weeks and months, most of these were peaceful protests, obviously met by extreme violence from the regime, but eventually, by the end of 2011, into 2012, the conflict changes in nature to one of armed confrontation between the regime and a militarized opposition. And that is when we see the very sharp spike, the sharp rise in damage to Syria's cultural heritage. Now, there are 2 primary reasons or sources for this. One is the opportunistic subsistence looting, which can be opportunistic or subsistence-based. These are interchangeable terms. We see a huge amount of damage being done from late 2011 into 2012 by this looting. And the looting is very, very extensive. It is happening in all areas. It is happening in areas under ISIS control. It's happening in areas under regime control. It is happening under areas under opposition control. It is indiscriminate and very widespread. And then second, obviously, it's the ongoing military operations. For the looting, I'm just going to show you briefly. You may have all seen these satellite images from Upper Maya. You can see there's the site of Upper Maya here. And this is the government, this is the actual, the archaeological site stretches all the way around here. You can see it like so. But this part is privately owned, and this is the main government-owned part of it. And in 2011, everything's normal. By 2012, the entirety of the government-held area is looted completely, totally. It looks like Swiss cheese. Okay, and you can see whereas the non-government area is still, non-controlled area by the government is still intact. By 2013, it begins to spread, and you can see it slowly spreading until by 2015 and 2016, the latest images, the whole site is now completely chewed up. And, you know, it's just completely indiscriminate looting. The other sort of damage we've seen is through the actual fighting. This is the Crac du Chevalier, one of our 6 World Heritage, UNESCO designated World Heritage Sites. In this case, it was occupied by the opposition in 2012. So in 2013 and 14, the regime tried to dislodge the opposition fighters there, and they used heavy artillery and airstrikes to do that. And of course, the castle suffered severe damage in the process. Similarly, in this case, it's the other way around. This is the citadel of Aleppo. A regime sniper was positioned up there. He was shooting at the people down in the opposition-held areas. They dropped a mortar shell on him, and it unfortunately destroyed a part of the wall as well. And then there's the indiscriminate use of barrel bombs and airstrikes. You've heard about them, and they are indiscriminate because they can land anywhere. In this case, in 2015, they struck one of our museums that we have access to, and it caused grievous damage to the building. This was a barrel bomb, actually. The importance of this museum is that it contains a very unique collection of mosaics that also come from another one of our World Heritage Sites, the Dead Cities. And you can see closer here, and there are some of the mosaics that were displayed out in the courtyard, and they've also been badly damaged in addition to the building itself. And there you can see a close-up of that mosaic, completely destroyed. And then finally, there is the deliberate destruction. This is the one that's most publicized, the one that gets the most attention, and that's associated with ISIS, Daesh. I should also like to remind you that Daesh is involved both in looting and in the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage. So you can add looting to that as well. And most iconic, again, is the Temple of Bel from Palmyra. There's your before and after pictures. And if in the discussion anybody would like me to explain why ISIS does this kind of stuff, I'd be happy to explain, but I won't go into the details here. Now it comes to the critical question for us. What can we do? What is being done? And who is doing it? So obviously we have international organizations. That includes organizations like UNESCO, like ICOM, like World Monuments Fund, WMF. They are supposed to be at the forefront. They're supposed to be at the, the front line, the first line of defense, protecting this cultural heritage or helping protect this cultural heritage. Unfortunately, the reality is that for the most part of Syria's cultural heritage, it lies in areas outside regime control. Currently, the regime, in fact, from 2012 until today, the Syrian regime has never controlled any more than 25 to 35% of the country. So the remaining 65 to 75% of the country is in areas outside regime control, which means that there is no input from the DJM, that's the Department of Antiquities, or any other state institution, if and when such an institution does exist or is able to function. And it means that it's down to local archaeologists, local activists, local museum curators, just people, local stakeholders, to get out there and try and do what they can to protect their local cultural heritage. And they are the front line. They have essentially become our first line of defense in the vast majority of Syria where they are existing. And they are supported by NGOs such as the Day After. But the problem, going back to this group, is that these institutions, these international organizations, are, because of the way they are structured, because of the way they operate, they're unable to work except with other state institutions. So in effect, you have UNESCO and ICOM and WMF only working with the DGAM and the regime side, which is okay. I mean, they need to work with them as well, because remember, 35% of the country's cultural heritage is in that area. But what about the other remaining 65 to 75%, depending on what year you're looking at? Who's looking after that? And this is where the catastrophic failure is. Until now, none of these organizations have figured out a way, even though perhaps they may want to, they have not figured out a way to essentially start that process. And so there is no assistance coming to most of the country's cultural heritage. And that is why I tell you it is down to non-governmental organizations like the TDA. The Day After was established in 2012. It was primarily, the idea was to produce a vision of a post-Assad Syria, but also to look at how we can change or bring democracy and democratic processes into Syria. But then we added a heritage protection initiative in 2013. This is the initiative that I also, in addition to being a co-founder of this, I also help coordinate the Heritage Protection Initiative. And what HPI does is it provides this institutional framework which organizations like UNESCO, like ICOM, like ICOM should have been providing, but are not there to do it. So we now provide that role, and we provide that through that the support for these non-state actor networks, activists, and so on and so forth, who are working on the ground, risking their lives every day to document this damage and to try and prevent or protect what's there. How do they do that? Well, they certainly start to move any exposed materials from the courtyards in case another barrel bomb falls on the museum. We also sandbag. This is one of our primary means of defense. We use sandbagging techniques to protect the mosaics inside this museum and other museums as well. We apply cloth, this is water-based glue, and then cloth as a first layer, and then we fill up the sandbags, and we then use those to protect the mosaics. It's a very effective technique, because I can tell you that first barrel bomb that dropped on the museum in 2015, the only reason why those mosaics didn't get destroyed, the big important ones inside the galleries, was because of these sandbags. And when the second airstrike hit us in 2016, you can see, again, there's a mosaic underneath here, there's a mosaic here, and a mosaic here. All of those were protected, even though the rock came through here, because of the sandbagging. It's an effective technique, it's very simple, it's very low tech. It was used in the Second World War to protect the cultural heritage of Europe, and now it's being used to protect the cultural heritage of Syria. And like I said, other mitigation projects that TDA and local activists, local archaeologists do is try to stabilize these buildings. If you don't stabilize this, if you don't do some sort of emergency intervention just to prevent the deterioration and degradation of the building, the roof will collapse. So this is emergency intervention. It's not permanent. It is not meant. This is not restoration. This is just emergency repair to stabilize the situation, waiting for the post-conflict era. Again, where you have this kind of damage, the stones have to be numbered. They have to be removed one by one, and then they're there you are. And then they're stacked neatly in the hope that one day we will again be able to decide on how to do restoration. The other important job that we do is to try and track the looting of antiquities. This is probably one of the hardest things we do, and it's one of the greatest challenges, not least because of the way in which the looting occurs. The looting process itself is extremely aggressive. This is from a site near Meskene. This was licensed by ISIS through the Manbij office, and here's what they came up with. This is part of a hoard that came from that. They hit a Bronze Age grave complex, and a lot of material came out. And we were able to track and trace this all the way down till it got to the Raqqa auction, where it was eventually sold. I think the initial bidding price was around $25,000 for the collection. And this is how we track this. We, amongst other things, we use WhatsApp, where we get information. This is a mosaic that they were trying to sell us. We eventually got down to Istanbul. We were able to see it and film it. And these are two, again, Palmyran reliefs that were taken out of Palmyra just before ISIS began destroying. So remember, ISIS doesn't just destroy, it allows first for the looters to strip, and then it blows things up. That's one of the hallmarks of the way this works. And these were then taken to Raqqa and sold over there. And this is another looted mosaic that you can see. Now, one of the tools that we have, and we have recently been able to acquire to help us protect against looting, is basically this use of smart water. This is a new polymer. It's just come online. It was invented by a small British firm in England, and you can apply it through this spray. And what the spray does, once it dries, it's invisible until you shine. Until you shine basically an ultraviolet light at a certain wavelength, and then it will light it up. And now we are using this. We're applying this substance to a lot of the artifacts that we have both in the museums and in the and also any looted finds that we come across. Often looters will call us, they'll invite us to come and look at what they found, document it before they sell it on. It's almost like it makes them feel better. So we'll let you document this, but then we're going to go and sell it. But if we are able to also market like that, then that's really good. Now, the most important thing about the smart water substance is not the fact that it leaves this mark like that and that you can light it up, but in the fact that then if this shows up in a market in Europe or in America, all I need to do is, and I find it, all I need to do is take a tiny microscopic sample of the polymer, not of the pot, but of the polymer itself. Just scrape it off and then send it to the lab in England, and they can immediately tell me exactly when it was marked and where. So I can determine the provenance, I can prove that it was in Syria and it was looted from there. And that is a huge advance for us in being able to combat and prevent the looting of antiquities. And I'm going to end by showing you some of our team, and every day we hope that they're still doing well, because these are the heroes of our story, not me. These are our heroes over here. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor al-Azm. That was a very inspiring presentation, and it's wonderful. It gives us all of us a hope that people on the ground actually, in time of difficulty, can go and actually protect their heritage and put their lives on the line. And we've come, there's time now for our next speaker, Professor Maya al-Ibrashy. Professor Maya al-Ibrashy is a conservation architect and architectural historian. She is founder and chair of the Built Environment Collective called Magaura and its commercial arm. She's the coordinator of the Adalina participatory initiative integrating conservation and community development based in historic Cairo. She is also adjunct professor of architecture at the American University in Cairo. Welcome, Professor.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming. Can we have the slides, please? Yes. So what I'm going to present today is al-Lina. This is an initiative that we've been working on since 2012.
Sorry, I'm used to this. I'm a professor.
Put it in your pocket.
It's a habit.
And by we, as Sada rightly said, we're both an NGO and a commercial entity. Magaura is the name of the office, and the Built Environment Collective is the NGO. And in al-Lina, which translates as heritage is ours from Arabic, we partner with Cairo Governorate and the Ministry of Antiquities. So we are a non-state operator, but we partner extensively with the government. And our mandate is that heritage should be beneficial to the community. If it is, they will take a role in conserving it. And in order for it to be beneficial, conservation and management should actually be a driver for development. That you cannot conserve in isolation from socioeconomic development and improvement of everyday life. Let's see if I can work this. Oh no, here we go. So of course I'm from Egypt, and with Egypt you think heritage, and these are two of the most iconic images of Egypt, obviously the pyramids, and on the other side Islamic Cairo where I work. And generally when people think of benefit from heritage, we immediately think of tourism. Our argument is that tourism is not the only source of benefit from heritage. It should not be viewed as such. Not just because of the detrimental effect of tourism, but also because it is a very, in our part of the world, it's not something that you can rely on. This is a graph that shows the decline of revenue from tourism in Egypt from 2010 to 2017. 2017, so it went up from 12.5 billion USD, which is actually very little, from 2010 to 6.1 billion in 2016. So obviously not a lot of money. That's not what we should think heritage should be for. Actually, the world trend now is to think of heritage as a part of development. As I said, it's listed in the SDGs of the UN, SDG 11.4, and in the last UN Habitat Conference concerning the New Urban Agenda, UNESCO presented this PDF, and the link is here, it's available online. And in it, they talk about heritage and culture as the kind of baseline for any kind of development that you can do in cities, but they also acknowledge the problematics of that, in the sense that heritage is political. So it's a stage for conflict, it's a stage for, as Amr very rightly showed us, it is where all the problems of the world are acted out, and it's used for politics, but the moment something political happens that is major, it's us to sort of take a backseat. So it's very problematic in that sense. Now, in the presentation on our neighborhood, our sort of neck of the woods in North Africa, the case study of Cairo that you see here talks about claims of the emergence of a right to heritage. What do they mean by that? They basically talk about a number of groups who popped up in 2011 after the revolution. Some of them had been operating from before, and they're called Save Cairo, Save Alex, Save Forsyth, Save Mansoura, Save Tanta, many saves. And this is basically because at the time, as I said, heritage was under attack, especially in the cities, and it was definitely not a priority in any way. And just look at the kind of heritage we're talking about. This is not the pyramids, this is not the minarets. This is what you think of as European heritage. Actually, the news is that it's a cosmopolitan heritage that has become an integral part of the heritage of where I come from, starting from the late 19th century. So, for example, this villa, which has since been torn down, this is one of the foremost examples, or the earliest examples, of the work of the architect Auguste Perret, who's one of the pioneers of working with concrete, and now it has been torn down in Alexandria. So this is one way of, this is one type of groups. Another type of groups are, I never get used to this. Oh, that's us. No, I will stop using the laser pointer. That's probably better. Groups who actually work on the ground, whether research or action interventions. So on the left, this is Takwin, and they have a research site called Tadamun. Highly recommended if you're interested in urban issues in the Middle East. And the website is down there. And Cluster, who work more in downtown Cairo, and they do a lot of publications and studies of the politics and the culture of downtown Cairo and how it's used as an urban space. And this is us. We sort of like to think of ourselves as part of that same bunch. We work in historic Cairo. Those of you who've been to Cairo, very close to the citadel. And as I said before, we conceive of heritage as heritage conservation and preservation as a vehicle and a driver for economic development. And in 2012, we held a series of participatory workshops talking to different stakeholders about the lines of action that we should take in intervening in a neighborhood such as Al Khalifa. And there were 3 lines. First of all, you want to talk ownership, you talk to children, and you, right from the start, you instill in them a sense of belonging and ownership of their heritage, not through teaching them about it in a dry manner, but through allowing them to develop wonderful memories of certain places that they would later be attached to and defend in case it's under attack. The other idea is that one does work on conservation, but the purpose of the conservation project should always be to allow the building to be used by the community in a manner that benefits them. And the third thing is we cannot work on conservation in an urban setting in isolation from, as I said, the socioeconomic setting. So we've done lots of work, but very quickly, this is an example of the work we do with children. This is a daily school in summer for 2 months that we have for children of the neighborhood with the mandate of heritage education. Of course, it's for free, and it's funded by other commercial activities that we do in heritage education. We always work with this hybrid model. This is the conservation work that we do. That's mostly with international funding, mostly from the US and a bit of funding from the UK. And these are 4 domes from the 12th and 13th century that we have renovated, that we have restored, and are currently in the middle of the street. And they were chosen in the course of the participatory workshops that we had held before. And this building here, this is the building that we rehabilitated as a community center. This is where the kids are taught about their education, but it's also where we hold cultural events related to the built environment as part of the work of our hub. Recommendation 3 was the trickiest for us because if you intervene on an urban scale, you have to be very careful about not upsetting the urban dynamics of the existing urban dynamics of the neighborhood. So you really have to try and understand it. And that's very difficult because it's multi-layered, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So we started off, small. Tourist promotion activities, street performances, street art, working on craft exchanges between designers and craftspersons, things of the sort. And then we grew a bit more optimistic and a bit more confident with what we know about the neighborhood. So we started to work on an urban survey where we identified borders for an action area, and we plotted it building by building. And from that, we were able to understand more the urban issues, and we identified infrastructure as the most urgent, problematic. And by infrastructure, there are two things: first, waste, and the second, groundwater. Now, concerning waste, there are two directions. The first is to actually work with people from the community as kind of watchdogs to monitor how effectively the government is running the waste collection system. And the second one is what you see here. And this is basically working on dumps in the neighborhood, empty plots that are used unofficially as dumps, and turning them into places for recreational sport for the people of the neighborhood. And this is a football field that we recently opened. It's funded by Cairo Governorate, and design and technical support comes from us. And this is the last thing this is what we're currently focusing on. This is the second infrastructure issue, groundwater. And in this case, this is rising groundwater, which means that unlike many parts of the world where people are suffering from underground water going down, in Cairo, water is going up, not because we're a miracle, but because this is not natural water, this is not from the aquifer, this is water leaking from supply and sewage pipes, which is ironic when you think of it, because Cairo is actually the second, one of the two most water poor capitals in the world, the second one being Lima. So we suffer from water poverty, but we're allowing, by a conservative estimate, 30% of the water to leak out of our network systems. So obviously the solution would be that we fix network systems, those are the water supply systems, but that is not the solution that the state is interested in any way. So what we try to focus on is to turn the problem into a solution. So this is the solution that happens a lot with heritage sites, that you introduce a system, a dewatering system, that pumps the water out and pumps it back into the sewage, where it will leak out again to the monument. But this water, by the time it reaches, the sewage is actually it's treatable. So the idea is very simply to take this water and use it. In this case, for example, this is the mosque and this is a yard right attached to it. So to use it for cleaning and for irrigation, and thus turn the yard from a place where garbage is dumped to a place that the community can use. And this is a more ambitious project, also along the same lines. In this case, these are the domes, and they suffer from rising groundwater, and they're inundated in water actually. And this is a strip of a half-acre strip of land on the opposite side. And again, it's the same system. I'm not going to go into the details. And right now, we're working on technically developing the know-how and also the designs for turning this strip of land into a park for the community, and also a magnet for tourism to come into the neighborhood when they see this green area with coffee shops, etc. And also it allows for job creation by providing commercial activities. Right now, we've developed 4 designs in the course of a workshop, and we're now working on 1 design out of the 4. Okay. So I'm done with my presentation. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of questions that maybe we can come up with in the debate. The first question, I think, for us is the politics of cultural heritage. Now, what you see in front of you is our sponsors and partners. And if you notice, they're from all over the world. Denmark, the UK, the US, obviously international organizations, Holland as well. TU Delft is over there. And it's fine and well to talk about how heritage is sort of something that belongs to all of us, but heritage is also contested. And heritage has been a sort of a tool for colonialism for years, and these still remain in the psyche of the people who have been colonized. And so on the one hand, you rely on international support and funding. On the other hand, you might potentially suffer from the stigma of being a tool of colonialism somehow. So we, as small entities who are not able to find funding in our own countries, we sort of have to walk that timeline. The second is a question is related to contested claims. Now we have this really romantic name of heritage is ours, but it's actually a question of whose heritage. Now Amr has shown us that in places like Syria, this is an extremely charged issue. But even in places like Cairo, which are relatively not in the best condition, but relatively more stable, it's still an issue. I mean, we cannot say we're working with the community. The community has many factions, it has many sides, and if you work with one faction, you're potentially the enemy of the other. And that's something that we always have to sort of stop and question ourselves about. The third issue is the issue of participation, and participation is bandied very widely as the answer to everything, but it's not as simple as you might read in much of the literature that talks about it. The literature is cleaned up, it's very neat, it's very pristine. Actually, participation cannot be free of hierarchy. If I call you to a place and I invite you to speak, I'm already up higher than the rest of you somehow. What has to happen constantly is a lot of cross-referencing, because people will tell you what they think you want to hear somehow, right? And the other thing that's very important is that sometimes participation is used as a kind of legitimizing tool for the state to justify bad practices, if it's done smartly according to the state or others. It can be used by anyone, not necessarily the state. And on the subject of the state, another question is partnership versus co-option. I was very careful at the beginning to say that we partner with the Ministry of Antiquities and with Cairo Governorate. And without this partnership, a lot of what we do cannot be done, and we value their partnership highly, but we're always careful not to be co-opted by the state, not to reach a point where they're not held accountable, not to reach a point where they say, okay, fine, the NGOs can do the work. The state is still the first entity responsible for the preservation and the management of our heritage, and they have to be held accountable for that, particularly within sort of the neoliberal approaches that are inundating us more even than you. We sort of took that from you and then we elaborated on it. And I think this is, no, that's not my last one. I will skip that one just to stick to the time. I think this would be my last one. No, it never ends. But how far should we go? Now this is a first drawing of that park that I showed you. And the first time we drew it, we were like, oh my God, it looks so clean and so neat. Then we took it to the governorate and they loved it. And it's sort of, you ask that question, you have to produce something that is seductive enough for the government to think, this will make a good photo of before and after. But at the same time, you have to continue to keep the identity of the neighborhood and not make it so shiny it gets gentrified. And that's always an issue. And really my last one is a question related to institutionalization of knowledge, that people like us who barely keep our head above the water most of the time, because we work with very little resources, we try to do a lot with very little, but we learn a lot, and we stop every so often and ask ourselves, what do we do with this knowledge? Will we ever have the time to actually share it? Because what we are starting to realize that the knowledge that we have is very valuable, and that it is a it's not a counter narrative, but it is a parallel narrative to what is to the literature that is there on development or participation, etc. And we're finding that that our experience resonates more with the experience of people coming from India, or from other parts of the Arab world, or North Africa, etc. And we find that all of us have the same problem, that we barely have time to do what we're supposed to do, and we don't have time to actually write it up or report on it. And these are our websites if you're interested in looking at this further, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor. That has given us a lot of food for thought and very inspiring questions, provoking a discussion, and I really look forward to a lively discussion after the last speaker's talk. I would like to now go to our last speaker, Professor Cynthia Schneider from Georgetown University. Professor Schneider is a distinguished professor in the practice of diplomacy at Georgetown University. She teaches and publishes and organizes initiatives in the area of cultural diplomacy. This morning there was a lecture with all of these speakers of cultural diplomacy. For that reason, I am wearing my Egyptian-inspired earrings, which I bought at the Metropolitan Museum. So, my day of act of cultural diplomacy. Ambassador Schneider also co-directs the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics at Georgetown, as well as the Los Angeles-based MOST resource, Muslims on Screen and Television Initiative. Additionally, she co-directs the Timbuktu Renaissance, an innovative strategy and platform for countering extremism and promoting peace and development. Professor Schneider was also the US ambassador in 1998 till 2001 to the Netherlands. Welcome.
Eerst wil ik even hartelijk dank aan mijn collega's uit Leiden, LUCIS en ook Humanity House en ook het ministerie van Buitenlandse Zaken. Het is altijd voor mij een grote plezier terug naar Nederland te komen. Hartelijk dank. En nu ga ik verder in het Engels. I want to make sure that we have some time for discussion, so I'm going to self-edit, I think, some slides because we got a little bit of a late start. I want to make sure we have some time for discussion, and I would love for you to see a very beautiful film I have at the end of mine. I think it's more interesting than me. But I would like to begin not with me telling you how important, as Amr put it so beautifully, the past is for the future, but someone who's right in the thick of it. A young Afghan filmmaker who I met when he was in Los Angeles on a fellowship. And take a look at what he says, talking about the importance of a bridge to the past, and it's the arts that make that bridge to the past in building a future for his country, Afghanistan. And he talks about the arts as a mirror in which a nation can see itself, and how important it is to repair that mirror in order for the nation to be able to go forward. And this is a theme I'd like to pick up with you. We've alluded to it a little bit already this morning. We talk about it more, but cultural heritage is basically a foundation of identity. And that, sadly, is, I think, the reason that it is so often attacked, particularly recently. Daesh wants to take over, dominate, subjugate, and impose their version of history, their narrative. So to do that, you begin by destroying history, destroying the past and the source for an alternative identity. This has happened also in Timbuktu, where I work, when it was occupied in 2012, and I'll show you some more about that later. But it's not just the Middle East and Islamic countries. This happened also in Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge in the 1970s not only killed 2 million people, but also destroyed Cambodian culture by literally trying to kill the practitioners. And the revival of Cambodian culture has been essential to the somewhat miraculous revival of that country. You're all familiar with the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas by the Taliban. Again, the same idea. Hitler, of course, did this during World War II. And it goes all the way back to colonization. What did the colonial powers do? Here you see a Spanish Catholic church literally on top of a Mayan temple. So they very literally superimposed their culture on the past. So this, I think you're so brilliant to come up with this topic, because culture, I think, is directly related to citizenship and what it means to be a citizen. We've seen examples, particularly today with Daesh, of how the bad guys understand the importance of the destruction of culture. But do the good guys get how important it is, and therefore how important it is to support it in rebuilding countries? We understood this in the past in World War II. with a wonderful episode of The Monuments Men, supported directly by General Eisenhower, who recognized the importance of preserving European culture, not because it was European culture, but because this was the world's heritage, the world's history. Unfortunately, that was not an unbroken line, and it was dramatically forgotten in the invasion of Iraq, when you all will remember the picture of the tank in front of the oil ministry, and I hasten to say this is not the fault of the poor person on the tank. This was a decision taken much higher up, we know now, directly taken in the office of Secretary Rumsfeld, who left us with this memorable quote, explaining the stuff happens, explaining the destruction of the ransacking of the museum and the archives. And he literally said in a press conference, you know, I don't know where all these vases come from, coming in and out, so many vases. Who knew there were so many vases in Iraq? Well, anybody who knows anything, I mean, literally, who's taken 4th grade history knows that the vases in Iraq are the seminal objects of civilization. So, you know, we can make fun of it, but it had catastrophic results, because what's the message to the Iraqis? You know, we're saying, please be our partners in rebuilding your country. But by the way, we could care less about your history. What kind of message is that to your future partners? Well, we figured that out a little bit, and now cultural heritage training is something that's part of the military in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And we even, to communicate this message to soldiers on the ground, printed thousands and thousands of decks of cards which had the key Iraqi sites on one side, and on the other side information about them and instructions of things to do and not do, like not pitching your tent on Babylon, which actually happened. And this also in Afghanistan, come back to Afghanistan, is hugely important there, where this is the motto of the Kabul Museum, and you see a couple of objects from the museum there. It's a miracle that this museum is standing today, which it is. You see it there. And I had myself a very moving experience there with my Afghan translator on a trip there in 2010. He'd never been to the museum, and he was just bowled away by the evidence that Afghanistan had been a great civilization. In fact, the great civilization in Central Asia. He never knew that. And I could see how, first understanding that it had been a completely Buddhist country, very different from knowing about the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas, but actually understanding that his country had been Buddhist. And then understanding that it had this great history, and that shifted his sense of what was possible in the future. It wasn't just a war-torn country, it had been a center of civilization. This is something that I'm proud to say the U.S. Embassy also understood. This is Ambassador Carl Eikenberry at the great Buddhist site of Mes Aynak, and he spoke very movingly at the dedication of an exhibition on Mes Aynak in the museum in Kabul, remembering his first trip as a child to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, and how seeing American history in that museum made him ask himself for the first time, what does it mean to be an American citizen? And so he suggested that the renovation and the reopening of the National Museum in Kabul could have the same impact on Afghans, seeing their own history and reflecting, what does it mean to be an Afghan today? What is our future? We even had, for several years, a resident archaeologist at the embassy in Kabul. Dr. Tedesco is now in the State Department. She works on Afghanistan and Pakistan. But this was a recommendation of the Inspector General. That means the person who goes around inspecting embassies all over the world and figures out what they're missing, what's wrong with them, if anything's not going right. And this person recommended an archaeologist for the museum in Kabul. Pretty profound understanding of the importance of cultural heritage. And we see this today in Afghanistan, where Afghans themselves are restoring the building right across from the museum, the Ruliman Palace, a great symbol to Afghans of Afghan greatness. They've taken this on themselves with a quite different budget than the US came up with when we did a feasibility study. And I want to just juxtapose for a minute, it's been mentioned already, the Mostar Bridge, which you see on the right, with the restoration of Darul Aman Palace. This comes back a little bit to Amer's theme about international organizations. I'm all for the restoration of the Mostar Bridge, who wouldn't be? But it was a decision of international organizations, and it was trumpeted as, oh, we have the bridge, we're now bridging the two sides in the Bosnian conflict, and they're coming together. Well, that, sadly, in the city of Mostar isn't the slightest bit true. It's still a completely divided city. So I just want to emphasize the importance of grassroots initiatives for restoration and cultural heritage, such as we're seeing now in Afghanistan. And finally, let me just say that we've talked a lot about buildings. They're important, but cultural heritage is also alive. And one of the most important impacts in Afghanistan has been had by the television program Afghan Star. And this is a program modeled on the American Idol model. I know you have it here, every country has it. But what that has done that's so important is it's provided a meritocratic platform, a platform where people succeed just on their own talents. So that means it's a platform for women, a platform for minorities, and the winners are chosen by voting, by popular vote. There's a documentary called Afghan Star, and these are the 3 finalists that year. The finalists also campaign for themselves, and their supporters campaign for them. So it's very much engaged in sort of political activity. And this contestant, who's from Kandahar, insists that the Taliban were also SMSing votes for her. And this, we love to say, oh, this leads to democracy. These aren't my words. The same contestant from Kandahar said, my friends tell me you're Pashtun. What are you doing? You're abandoning us, the Pashtuns, for democracy. So that's how it was perceived there. So I think, again, I just want to emphasize the taking away the division between culture and politics. This is an artificial division that we make in the United States. I think you make it a little bit here. We push culture to the side. That is not true in most other parts of the world. They're completely connected. And that is true also in Mali. So I'm going to leave you now with the film, 5-minute film, narrated by Morgan Freeman, which tells the story of the importance of culture in Mali and the conflict and how culture is leading to the country's resurgent coming back from the conflict. So please go ahead with the film. Thank you.
Timbuktu. Perhaps no place in the world has so vividly captured our imagination like this fabled desert city in the West African nation of Mali. Mysterious, otherworldly. So remote and difficult to reach, most people don't even know if it truly exists. I have a deep connection to this part of the world. My own ancestry can be traced back to the desert nomads who settled Timbuktu centuries ago. Along the big bend of the Niger River, where Savannah meets the Sahara, Timbuktu was an oasis in the vast desert. A vibrant city at the heart of the trans-Saharan trade routes. Merchants came here carrying gold from the south and salt from the north. They also brought scholarship, creating an astonishing written record of intellectual achievement on par with the Italian Renaissance. With its renowned university, Timbuktu became a center of scientific inquiry and religious tolerance. And then there was the music. Musicians celebrated the region's deeply rooted musical traditions, creating a sound so soul-stirring that it's transcended all boundaries and time, from this heart of Africa to the place I call home in the Mississippi Delta, a music we now know around the world as the blues. The music is celebrated yearly at the world-famous Festival of the Desert, where regional musicians share the stage with rock legends.
This part of West Africa is like the cradle of music. It's like the big bang of all the music that we love.
In 2012, militants linked to al-Qaeda invaded northern Mali and occupied Timbuktu. The extremists brutalized people, smashed sacred buildings, burned priceless manuscripts, suppressed women, denied education, and silenced the music. Yet another dark chapter for the world in our daily struggle to counter the ignorance of violent extremism. A cancer destroying civilization in once proud and empowered places. In 2013, French-led forces restored a fragile peace, but Timbuktu has been devastated, and the attacks continue. This story of Timbuktu doesn't end here. In fact, it begins anew. A simple phone call from a sand-swept refugee camp to a city half the world away, one friend to another, united in their love of music. They envisioned the Renaissance in Timbuktu, a grassroots movement to counter violent extremism, using culture as a catalyst for development and lasting peace. They began with the musicians, breaking the silence with a touring festival in exile. Their success inspired others to join the movement, from social entrepreneurs and professors to diplomats, presidents, artists, architects, and actors.
If we could get Mali's musicians to play at the UN, I think there'd be like world peace in 5 minutes.
They joined arms to save Timbuktu's precious manuscripts, rebuild UNESCO World Heritage Sites, lay the groundwork for the university's rebirth as a center for culture and innovation, spark development in tourism, agriculture, education, natural resources, and the empowerment of women.
This can become a story of reconciliation, cooperation, and development.
There is much to be done, so time can't be wasted. This struggle against violent extremism may seem like a distant problem, but in our interconnected world, it's right at your front door. It's up to all of us to act. I'm lending my voice. What will you do?
Thank you so much. I watched this film earlier today and I cried and I thought, Morgan Freeman got me again. It's extremely inspiring evening. I'm really honored to be moderating this, and I would like to ask the speakers please to join me on the table and we can start questions.